All right, we're going to get back into our first-person camera script now, and this time we're going to add the code into our update function. Again, the update is the method called once per frame, and this is going to be what actually controls moving the camera as well as our player to match the movement of our mouse. So to start, what we want to do is say float mouse x with a capital X is equal to input. And this is going to be a little bit of a long one, so buckle up. Input.getAxis with parentheses and quotations. We're going to say mouse x, and we're going to step outside of the parentheses now, and we're going to say times using shift and pressing the 8 key, and say mouse sensitivity, that float variable we just made, and then we're going to multiply that by time.delta time. So a couple of things to note here. You may notice that we make a float up here by typing float and then variable name. You can actually do that inside of a method as well. But what's important to note is that if you make a variable inside of a method, you will only have access to that variable inside the method you created it in. So for example, if I tried to use mouse x in the start method, you would see that it underlines it in red because if you can read it there, it says it does not exist in the current context. So anything that we declare by writing the variable name inside of a method, we can only use inside this method. So that's perfect. So what we're going to do now is click at the end of this line outside of the semicolon here, and we're going to press and hold Control or Command if you're on Mac and hit the D key. And what that's going to do is duplicate our line, so now we have it again exactly the same. Only this time we're going to go through and replace these capital X's with capital Y's. And that's going to get our two numbers to represent our movement of the mouse left and right for mouse X, and the mouse up and down for mouse Y. Next, we're going to click outside of that second line, give ourselves some space by pressing Enter a few times. And we're going to say camera X rotation is equal to, or minus equal to, mouse Y, and add our semicolon there. And we're going to say camera X rotation is equal to math f. And this is going to give us some math functions to use. So we're going to say math f dot clamp, and clamp is a method we can call, so we need those parentheses. And we're going to say camera x rotation, comma, negative 90f and 90f. So what we're doing here is camera X rotation, although it doesn't make sense intuitively, camera X rotation is actually the rotation of our camera in the up and down direction. You might think that's Y, but you remember that when we're rotating, the axis that we're talking about, in this case the x-axis, is the axis we're rotating around. So if the x-axis is a line going through the side of an object, we would rotate forward if we're spinning around that axis. It's a little bit difficult to understand conceptually, but trust me when I say that this is handling moving the camera up and down. By using this clamp function, we're clamping that so you can't look any more than 90 degrees down, which is straight down, or 90 degrees up, which is straight up. Now we're going to step outside of the parentheses for clamp here and the semicolon, hit enter, and we're going to say transform with a lowercase t dot local rotation is equal to quaternion, that big weird word again, dot Euler, and we're going to say camera X rotation, comma 0f, 0f. So that's going to rotate our camera up and down only and not worry about rotating along the Y or Z axis. Next, outside of that semicolon, we're going to hit enter again. We're going to say vector3 player rotation is equal to player body dot transform dot rotation dot Euler angles. And you may notice the Euler word here and the Euler word here. All a Euler is a rotation represented as a vector. So if we go back to our scene view and you click an object, you'll see the rotation value in the transform is the same as position or scale in an X, Y, and Z value. That's not technically how rotation works. Rotation is not these number values, but it's actually a matter of degrees, and there's a lot of weird, complicated things at play determining a rotation, but rotations can be represented as what's called a Euler angle, and that value is just the rotation turned into a vector 3. And it's much easier to work with than quaternions because they're very, very complicated pieces of math here. So with that explained, we're now going to say, well, we don't want X or Z rotation on the player. Our player only wants to turn around the Y-axis, that is to spin upright, as you would probably imagine it. So we're going to set player rotation.x to 0. So that means we're not rotating up and down. And we're going to set rotation.z equal to 0. Oh, and it helps to spell rotation correctly. And that's going to handle preventing us from doing front flips. Finally, what we want to do is say player body dot transform dot rotation is equal to quaternion dot Euler player rotation. So now that's going to handle rotating. Oops, got to spell rotation right again. It's going to handle turning our player based on our camera movement, and then we're going to say player body dot rotate vector 3 dot up times mouse x. Great, so now our player will rotate properly when we turn our mouse to the X and Y. So what we're going to do is hit Control S and save this script, or again, you can hit the buttons at the top. And we're going to switch back over to our scene view now and test it out. So if I click off and hit play, you'll see my mouse cursor should be locked to the screen. Oh, and this is very solution as to why. So before we can actually test it, we need to make sure we are attaching the first-person camera script to our main camera. So when we added the script for the player, we did it using add component, and that automatically did this. So what we want to do is select our main camera under our player, and we're going to drag this first-person camera script directly onto the camera in the inspector. You can also do this by dragging it onto it in the hierarchy, whichever is easiest for you. You will need to go into the inspector now, go to the player body field, and you'll see it says none transform. We're going to drag the player object into that field. Once we've got that, we can now hit play, and we'll notice that if we move the camera, it updates accordingly, and we can run around and look around, and our movement now follows our camera motion. And this should feel very familiar to you. I'm sure you've played lots of games with this type of setup before. So yeah, this is going to be the basis for handling, controlling our first-person player in the game.